But to give you one example, when I was a younger man, I would have seen anything that resembled even facially appear to be preferential treatment. And I mean, like I would have seen BET. What kind of racist nonsense is this? Like I would have seen that and not now. Of course, when I would see that, I would be like, okay, there's additive. I would call this additive diversity and subtractive diversity. Subtractive being the kind the right wing talking heads always like to pick out of the out of the field. And oh, this there were three people on a panel and two men and a woman, and the woman canceled the 11th hour. So instead of having three men, they just canceled the panel. I would call that a subtractive move in in the effort to promote diversity. But something like where more stories are being told, more candles with different hues to light the room better, man. That's good. That's additive. Now where I'm at, it's like, yeah, this is great. My favorite example of this in Canada, about I guess about 8 or 9 years ago. I mean, you know how we're nuts about hockey, right? Um, there's a man, first generation, Harner Ryan Singh loved hockey, but there was like no Punjabi language hockey broadcast. So he while the game was on, he would do like pirate radio broadcast play by play out of his room, doing play by play commentary on the game and just to try and spread the game. And now, um, years later, he's worked so hard at that. We have like Punjabi language feeds for our hockey night game. We have Cree language feeds for similar the Aboriginal People's Television Network. We'll have play-by-play commentary in Cree for hockey. And when you know what like hockey is to our fabric in Canada, I'm like 49-year-old Charles says, "Wow, this is great. This is wonderful." Harner Ryan Singh had a goal call. Commentators when they call a goal, it was as epic as the Spanish or Mexican commentary guy that'd go goal, in the soccer games. It's like everybody in Canada knows it. It's I'll send a link to you after. It's just epic, right? Now we all love this. We embrace this. It's making hockey available to a wider audience. 19-year-old Charles was at Hockey Night Punjabi. What kind of preferential treatment, racist nonsense is this? I might have even said, you're in Canada, learn English. Hey, this is a good opportunity for you to, fit in, shape up or ship out kind of thing, right? Not, what I mean? Like not realizing the good that we're doing, not just for all Canadians, but for hockey, which I love. So,
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. Kind of mentioned a transformation from
yeah.
young Charles to new Charles. And I want to kind of have you walk me through that transformation a little bit. What do you think were some of the pivotal events or moments that kind of made you open up your perspective, that kind of open up your mind to seeing the benefit of diversity and of like other cultures and other people being represented? Like what changed your viewpoint? What made you and why do you think that you developed the viewpoint that you started out with? I guess those so it's a
Uh,
combo question. Sorry.
okay. No, that's okay. I would say if I'm looking at how I started, I would say that I reflected the prejudices of the generation I grew up, late 70s, early 80s, right? Um, the general culture, and that's something that's always stuck in my mind to be aware of. Whenever we talk about how important it has been to scrub these kind of just bad vibes or what I don't know a better word to say, but just to scrub this lazy acceptable prejudice from our society. It's because yeah, the next generation is growing up. What they see their parents indulge in,
Can I just
in just
sorry.
offhand, and then
Can I
they're
just can I
born with
just
that, and
hey
then they have to
Charles.
unlearn it.
Charles,
Yeah.
sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you,
Well,
but can I
oh,
just
please, you're the host, man. You can go on ahead.
I just want to ask you one question
Okay.
about lazy, because that's something that I think I don't know. I want to zero in on that real quick. You kind of
Okay.
describe the racism as lazy, right?
uh, specific specific stereotypes that we apply without thinking about it, without doing any work, thinking about what we're doing. That's all I meant by lazy. Is it? We apply them lazily, I guess might be We do it without thinking, without trying, without doing it. Oh yeah, of course. Ethnic group
So
X
maybe
is, well, that's wrong.
unconsciously, maybe.
Unconscious. There's a much better word. Or subconsciously, not unconsciously. Yeah. But yeah, we do it without thinking about, without actively engaging it. So the kind of subconscious racism that we see come forth from our older generation, it gets to be very easy to pick up on that. And then you have to grow up and think of, changes like, like my evolution when I'm talking about hockey. It took a friend who was convincing me, like, well, you love hockey. Don't you agree that this, what you're seeing is good for hockey, right? And what this is going to do, this is going to get more people who like hockey, and then the game grows, more people watch it. Isn't that what you want? And then, yeah, direct challenge to my principles. I know,
Oh,
related to
wait.
gender.
Pause, pause,
Oh,
pause. Okay, so let's
sorry.
stop right there. So you had a
Okay.
direct challenge to your principles, and that's what really
Mhm.
did it. I have been the direct challenge to a lot of people's principles in my life. I have been that person quite a large number of times, and I am so curious about that moment because these are the moments I always try to get people to think about. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, I don't remember this or that." You definitely remember because you remember that moment when your principles were challenged, and most people can pinpoint those moments because they're pivotal. They like dictate how you will move forward. In your existence and like what kind of decision making you're going to do and how you're going to think. So at that moment was the thinking for you like I love hockey so much, so why would I be thinking these things about it if it's true that these things are good for hockey?
Yeah, it's like, if I like to see the game, I want to see it grow, and I'm engaging in behaviors and spreading rhetoric that inhibits, what I'm growing. Then I'm not being true to myself. And on a broader scale, when I talk about my larger principles of wanting, equality and equal rights and equal opportunities, so doesn't a demographic group have a right to, they it's not like they marched down to the CBC in an armed insurrection and said, you're going to put my foreign language broadcast on the air, or we're going to, blah blah blah. No, they built a product. And again, going with that fiscal conservative thing, they saw a need, they filled a need, and they did it so expertly that it was embraced. And I'm like, yeah, even just from a principle of fiscal conservatism, this is a great success story. What he's done, man. Yeah, had a vision, made it happen, made it so palatable the nation embraced it. Nothing but positive vibes there.
Um, all right, so you had mentioned like making things better and making things worse.
Mm,
So let's take it to math a little bit and
okay.
talk and kind of. I'm going to try to structure a little argument for you here and just see what
Okay.
you think. So, one of the changes that I've made in the rhetoric that I use about race and racism is I was confronted about using white supremacy. And a lot of people confronted me about that in the very beginning of me doing the Contraband Wagon conversations and whatnot.
Mhm.
And I really thought critically about it and hard about it. And I really decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to use white supremacy to mean the entire universe of consequences of the uh, implementation of a tyrannical racial hierarchy with white people on the top and black people on the bottom.
Okay.
And the reason why I use it as like such an umbrella is because there's like an infinite universe of consequences. And I felt like first of all, I don't think people think of racism that way. They don't think
No.
of the universe of consequences and what might be in it from doing that. It's very narrow. It's very limited in scope. Most people's vision of
Yeah.
that. So one thing you have to realize is that's the situation under which a lot of people of color are living, where the majority of people have a very narrow vision of this immense, enormous problem that impacts you on a day to day basis.
Okay.
And there is a shocking lack of empathy for your humanity. that still persists in all kinds of different ways, both personally and impersonally.
Mhm.
Um, and so when you say like make things better, right? You're talking
Mhm.
about people who have that narrow vision, kind of expanding that vision, expanding it beyond, the narrow goggles, and they need to be given space to do that, right? And they need to be
Yep.
given, an ability to do that. And if people are kind of shouting them down or like trying to shame them or trying
Mhm.
to make them feel some kind of misplaced responsibility or accountability, then that's never going to happen. Is that kind of like somewhat a decent summary of what you were saying?
I would say so. It's yeah, it's I guess and that's one thing I was certainly guilty of in my earlier years is what they call nut picking, if you will. For yeah, just focusing on the most outrageous arguments or the people that say the extreme things, and yeah, again, holding them up and say, see, it's all BS, right? Like, yeah, you can now. I would hope, I'd like to think I could successfully argue Juicy Smollett should serve some more than the 3 days in jail he has without, making it sound like I'm saying, racialized hate crime does not happen, right? And so much, if that I fail to communicate that, if I talk with someone and that impression doesn't come across, then that's on me. And I need to learn how to communicate that effectively. Because then I would say to myself, I'm making things worse and not better. Um, Another example like that, um, Colin Kaepernick and what he went through in the NFL. I would never, never mind your intelligence. I would never insult my intelligence by saying he never encountered racism in his time in football. And I think that as long if we focus on that, and I think this can still be true, even if we're doing statistical analysis of how well he played the last year to test a hypothesis. Specifically, he was good enough. He could have still been a top tier starter, making as good as people making $9 or $10 million. Something like that can that's a specific claim we can test and hypothesize about do analysis for. But if I focus on that to the point where Kaepernick, look at him, what a all the vitriol he's heard about again, then I'm making things worse, not making things better. So yeah, that's a good metric what you've proposed there. If it shuts people in instead of letting them open up and have room to grow. Yeah, I think it's funny when you mention technology. The first thing I thought you were going to be talking about was the ubiquity of cameras everywhere, um, and specifically with regards to police brutality.
I
And
mean,
I want
that's
to
definitely
emphasize,
one. That's a big one.
and I want to emphasize when I say that I found this funny, I do not mean ha ha funny. I mean I was so dumbfounded by it. I was like, oh my god. We all saw what George Floyd, the egregious abuses of power. So glad when Derek Chauvin went away for a long, long time, 22 and a half years. And I predicted it exactly, like to the day. For some reason, that pleases me that all my friends were like, oh, he's going to get off. It's like, no, man, this is what he's going to get. And when I think about how he was brought to justice because they had that technology. And then I looked back and I read the original Minneapolis Police Department release, and I like one of those kind of what the hell laughs. Like, wow, it was so detached from the reality, right? And this is just one case in one city in America. I'm like, how many more have we seen there, right? Um, and this is, man, I this is why I see when I want to say I see progress. There, Chauvin went away a long time. Ahmaud Arbery's murderers gone away for a long, long time. The whole case, Botham Jean was murdered. Amber Geiger, 10 years in prison. And I'm like trying to tell my friends, you realize that white female cop is the unholy trinity of we don't go to jail. And they still sent her away for 10 years because like the evidence and you just can't cover it up anymore because of that technology. And I think that's it's apocryphally attributed to Will Smith. I don't know who actually said it first, but I think part of the big change, it's not that there's necessarily more of these racist abuses now, it's just that we're now documenting them and able to see them. And with the evidence of your own eyes, where even the most stuck in the mud, right wing, far right, even like white supremacist types, you can't look at that. You can't look at what happened to George Floyd and just say, oh, it was an arrest gone wrong. Like you can't. It was what it was. It was what he was legally charged with doing. And thank the good Lord that at least the jury saw it that way too.
These thoughts about like the police and what they're doing, like everything we're
Mhm.
talking about, like you were like, oh, like there's no way you can make the case for, this was just a regular arrest, but people do, right? And they
Yeah,
did. And like,
yeah,
when I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff happens. Like the police reports are like some of the craziest thing if you ever investigate them. I actually brought someone on the show who was a former police officer, and then he became a police killing statistics PhD working
jeez.
on like a database. And so he was talking about like going through all these cases and realizing like just the number of deaths alone, period, without talking about any of the details, there's over 100% discrepancy, he said.
Oh yeah,
I
it's
was just like, that's crazy. There's these divergent thinking patterns as well,
yeah,
you know? And unfortunately, racism actually stops us from bridging that gap as well. So it's like it's
yeah,
self-perpetuating in a way that I feel like in other contexts that same scenario doesn't quite exist because you can find ways to bridge that gap. Like people always compare racism with gay marriage and stuff, right? Like oh, we got gay marriage, this and that. But I'm like, but you have a bridge for gay marriage,
yeah,
like like there's gay people everywhere. Like there's gay people
yeah.
littering this place, and like you're gonna start telling what that everyone around you, like not everyone, like so many different people around you can't have the right to get married. You're not gonna be able to comfort, like it just
Yeah.
it was easier with all these lawmakers having gay kids or lesbian kids, right? And then being like, oh, now I realize, now I understand, right? Same thing we were talking about earlier with having these relationships or whatever
Yeah.
with people who have that perspective or have that identity.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, that's a good point. Regarding the police, actually, that's a good thing. I will like to touch back on that. First, disclosure to you and your viewers. When I lived in Calgary for about 6.5 years, I was with the Calgary Police in a civilian IT support role, and I know that it's definitely not a apples to apples comparison between what policing was like, what you're experiencing in America, and not that we don't have problems in Canada, but I think it's like similar, but not identical, right? And when I was leaving the police, near then, this was in the early 2000s, and the then nascent technology of body cameras, we were just trying them out. And our floor had a liaison that interacted with us for the police. And I asked him just in a conversation, and he's like, "So, what do you think about these body cam technology?" And he said, "I think it's so important that I would immediately view as suspect any officer who didn't approve of it." And yeah, when you look back at, oh, the body camera accidentally got turned off, or oh, look, the hood of my patrol car sprung up and blocked the view, or whatever, right? Like, um, it's pretty clear how important, again, that documenting technology is. When the George Floyd thing was going on, I had a bunch of people in my social group. Uh, did you ever remember the name Canon Hinent? Did that name come across me? He was a 6-year-old white kid, got shot by a black male who was having a psychotic episode, as I understand it. And they were all like, well, George Floyd's, oh, what about this guy? What about Cannon? Why aren't we talking about Cannon Hinant, right? And I'm like, you realize that these marches, on these Black Lives Matter marches, and the awareness, you realize that this is for police brutality, right? And so, yeah, it's like, have you once said anything about Daniel Shaver? Have you once said anything about Tony Timpa? And like they don't even know who those people are, right? Be quiet, like Are you familiar with those cases that I named there?
Yeah, brother. I am familiar with
Oh, I bet.
quite a large number of police. There are so
Yeah,
many. I delve into them. It's at
yeah,
great cost to myself. Yes, quite a
yeah,
large number. I've
yeah,
seen police freeze people, light people on fire, tase people
yeah,
to death, choke people to death, shoot people. Obviously, just all kinds of different things.
yeah. And basically that's what I, called them out on, is like, you're just trying to deflect, right? Like, if you really are concerned that white victims of police brutality aren't getting airtime, I go to a BLM march, ask if you can say their name. I know when I talked to Rico about that, he's like, yeah, hell, we would have done that, right? I think it was a similar case in Arizona, and the marches they had for him, not only did they only have like about 30 people, but like four or five of them were black, like young black men marching for like, hey, this guy showed up at the door with his handgun because he thought he was being robbed. It was the police pounding on the door, not he sees that the police are there. He puts down his gun, they shoot him anyways. And I apologize if I'm dredging stuff you're all too familiar with, but
It's all good, brother.
just
No,
what
like it's good for
just
our
what
audience to hear,
yeah.
because a lot of people don't know this. I remember scenarios like I'm writing an autobiography right now, an autobiographical story about becoming a teacher and like kind of my journey through that. I can remember situations where people were looking at me as less than or like they wanted me to be less than.
Yes.
You know, like they were upset that I was succeeding. Like my success made them feel bad. And
Yeah.
like I remember seeing that over and over, but I never connected it to race, until later on, But it was palpable. And it gives you such a sense of insecurity, like, because I'm like, what does that mean? It's very confusing for as a child to be able to
Yeah.
perceive people being upset at your success. Like, did it change me wanting to succeed? No. Did it do
No.
anything about my curiosity? No. However, it creates an anxiety because you have to live in a world where with other humans. And if other humans are looking at you like that, that's a dangerous world for you.
All
That is
right.
a dangerous world where people are looking, frowning upon your success. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of just preaching right now, but like,
No, no, that's good. It's a lot to take in, but I think if I understand what you're saying correctly, it's almost like by succeeding, you were being uppity, I think, or you didn't know your place, and how dare you want to succeed, and how dare you want to show anyone. So of course that's when the language comes. Oh, obviously you got preferential treatment, right? For whatever, I don't know if we're going to get to touch on affirmative action, but whatever you've noticed, right? Even in systems where places where there's any affirmative action hiring, if any non-white person is selected, obviously they got it handed to them, right? Like even just the notion that this was either clearly the most qualified person for the job or on par with all other candidates, and affirmative action was done in a ties go to the runaway, as they would say in baseball, right? That just blows their mind because there's no logic to racism. They start with bigots that profound start with believing you must be inferior, obviously. So every single thing about you or your success or your progress through life, I will interpret, in such a way that I don't have to say, wow, maybe you're not inferior, right? Like, um, I
that's
can,
exactly it. It's to protect.
yeah,
It's to protect that illusion.
yeah,
It's like you are toying with one of the biggest illusions, most powerful illusions in
yeah,
existence, and I've been toying with that since I was born, pretty much. And so, like, I'm very adept at it. I'm very used to it. I'm very used to seeing people's reactions to it, and it's depressing, brother. It's depressing because it's like, why? Like it's very frustrating. It's not like there's anything you can really do about it except for just, you already achieved excellence. What else can you possibly do? You already
yeah,
are exhibiting it, and it's not enough. Not only is it not enough, it's the wrong thing for some people, and so like it's a very difficult situation to be in. So that's why people are so insulted by the pull yourself up by your bootstraps
Yeah.
bootstraps narrative because it is insulting. It's like
Yeah.
it's more gaslighting. Like we know the
Yeah.
scenario that we're in. We're not stupid. Like we can look around with our eyes and listen with our ears the same as everyone else. And it would be useful if more people would be willing to listen to black people. Halle Bailey, the Little Mermaid actress.
Yes.
Yeah, so she released a song today. One of the lines is "Black girl with the black girl hair." And she's talking. Obviously she's referencing all the vitriol that she got for playing
Hmm.
Ariel in the Little Mermaid. One thing that happened. I think you're familiar with Angel Eduardo on Twitter.
Yes, sir.
Right. So when that happened, one thing I noticed about him and like other people who claim to be like anti-racist, or at the time he was working with FAIR, I believe, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, and there was all these pieces written. I believe he wrote one or like commented on one or said something about the fact that they were racializing Ariel as black and that was like something that shouldn't be done. And that was despite the fact that the person who chose Ariel came out and was like, listen, we didn't choose her because she was black. She
Right.
literally was the first person to audition. She blew us away, and no one even
Yeah.
remotely came close to the performance that she gave. But did that matter to them at all? No, it did not matter. They were I don't know, somehow that reality was
Yeah.
meaningless for them. And like just
Yeah.
the fact that she was black playing Ariel, a character that had been drawn having white skin, fair skin,
Yeah.
like was a problem.
Yeah, and it's like I said, the success, it so boggles the racist mind, right? That like, no, she can't possibly have gotten it because she's good at singing something that isn't hip hop, or like how could she? She's clearly, again, obviously not talented. So, oh yeah, she got favors, or she was clearly they wanted to do a blah blah blah, and yeah, it's tiring, and it just because I would not, for what it's worth, and I know the situations aren't comparable necessarily, but if I saw something where you had like a two-person committee and they were both white people, and somebody was like, "Oh God, of course it's racial nepotism," like not even considering the case, just seeing it, two white people in two roles, that's bad, had to be bigotry. I would say, no, man, like, do we at least know if they were? Are we at least going to consider that they may have been the best two-person team? And again, to go back to the original one, these bigots will not consider that she could have been the best singer for the job. Now, I have stylistic issues with live remake movies. I'm of animation. I'm not a fan. I just like artistically, I don't like it. But
I mean,
if you
I
tell,
mean, you're
yeah,
not alone. Like a lot of people feel
no,
that way. Yeah, for
uh,
sure. Like,
but you tell me she did an amazing job and that she blew away. I have no reason not to believe you. You obviously, if you watched the movie, you would know more than I would. So yeah, it sounds like
I
she
actually didn't watch
was.
the movie, but like,
Oh,
I know her as a singer. She was
mm,
she was performing long before that. So like, I mean, I know her voice.
yeah,
And yeah, you should definitely listen to that song. I'll link you to that. We'll
okay.
share links after this. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah, for sure. I've had a similar, I think at least a similar conversation with a friend of mine I used to play poker with. There's an indigenous man. We had a chat once, and when you mentioned the up by the bootstraps rhetoric, you made me think of him because we were chatting once on a Friday night over cards, and he had said something that really kind of stuck with me. And he said, just out of the blue, he's like, Charlie, I'm just sick of hearing of, we need to pull ourselves up, right? He's like, we would love to, and people say to me, get over it. We would love to get over it. Nothing would please us more. But the problem is, it's been made a little hard for us to get over it. And so as a result, we're going to need a little help to get over it, and like to do the thing you want us to do, just the realities of the situation, the realities of, again, Canada's history of abuses with Indigenous people. It's made it extremely difficult and in many cases impossible to do it alone. And yeah, it's going to need all hands on deck effort, if you will. And that's more than just empty platitudes. That's more than just I know the term virtue signaling gets thrown around a lot, but especially by corporations, man, it is like sometimes just so hollow and empty. I'm like, oh, that made some manager somewhere feel good, but it didn't solve a damn thing, you know? Um, yeah, well, I think it's something we all, like I said, we all play a part, can play a part in elevating. And one of my heroes as a sports fan is Jackie Robinson. The I know everybody loved Chadwick Boseman in Black Panther, but to me, his portrayal of Jackie was just it was his finest moment. And one thing I looked at was the white people in power on that team, like Leo Durocher, the manager, the owner, Branch Rickey, the manager. When JR had a racist player start a petition saying, we're not going to play with a black man on our team. Leo just he goes off and he trades the player that organized the position like some bottom feeding team, just throws him away. Like, okay, just toil there for the rest of your life. I don't care. It's like, anybody else have a problem playing playing with someone? It's like, I know this rings of I don't see race, but it was the 50s, right? And so he says, I don't care myself if he's black, white, or zebra with polka dots. He's a very good player. And if you just get your heads out of your ears, he's going to help us win a lot of games, right? And when I look at Jackie Robinson's story and what he went through, it's like, I could never be a Jackie Robinson. Maybe I could be a Leo Durocher. Maybe I could play a Branch Rickey that always had his back, right? Thinking about ways, again, going back to my big point, make it better, don't make it worse. And I think the more of us that do that, the more we're going to get this ball rolling. 59-year-old Charles is going to look back on this and say, yeah, maybe I was off. If I was, how will I know if I was wrong? If I look back in 10 years and say, oh, yeah, we didn't have enough steam by it. We didn't have that critical mass needed of that critical amount of energy to break orbit, if you will, right? The gravity of bigotry is keeping us in a tight orbit and making it hard for us to break progress. So,
Well, I mean, we already know that, right? I mean,
yeah,
the question is like exactly what you said. Can we reach that critical mass? That is the
mm-hmm,
question. That is
yeah.
the question at this point. And so, like, either we're gonna do it or we're not gonna do it. And if we don't do it, I don't know what's gonna come out of that. Something hideous.
One of the things I always kind of daydreamed about is like, you know what? If we could just get every human being on the planet all together for a potluck dinner every Sunday, I think we could solve this problem in a generation, right? Because if you are forced to be closer to your fellow human, going back to what you said about the white people who only when they had close relationships of like, romantic or familial with the people of color, only now did they, wow, I can't believe this is going on. I think if we bringing people closer together and forcing them to focus on their commonality, right? Who doesn't love good food? Who doesn't love a good drink, man? Who doesn't love seeing kids play with each other, right? If so, as I know that's obviously never going to happen, it's kind of pie in the sky. But as the world's getting smaller with this technology, one of the things, obviously, the ubiquity of cameras, but the other thing is the communication. You and I, we've never met, we've never bumped into each other. Oh, and here we are having what I think is a pretty reasonable conversation um, over an electronic medium, broadcast across our planet-wide information network. The same planet-wide information network we are remote controlling a robot on another planet with and sending back pictures. Like the technology infrastructure has really blossomed in our lifetime to bring people together. Maybe we're not going to have that potluck around the world every Sunday, but you and I are going to be able to talk. And also, as I'm being drawn closer on the other side, and I see more and more of these like profoundly bigoted people who, as our mutual friend Rock says, just can't stand seeing a black man on the winning side of a cash register in life, right? They just can't take it. And then I see that and I'm like, wow, man, like this vitriol is terrifying, right? We need to push even if this person might be a lost cause, it just means we got to push past it, just keep going. And I don't know if it is my white privilege, if you'd call it that, for me to be more optimistic in my thinking, then that is what it is. But That's what I'm
I don't
seeing, and
think
that's what I'm hoping
I
for.
don't think
Right.
that, like, I mean, the kind of optimism that you're saying that you got to push past it, brother. You got to realize, like, just imagine yourself in that position. Of course you're going to push past it. What else are you going to
Yeah.
do? Like, the option is, like, lay down and die or push past it, right? So,
Yeah.
like, for
Yeah.
us, I understand from the outside, thinking about
Yeah.
persevering is like where the mind goes. But like when
Mhm.
you're in the situation, you don't really think so much about persevering because you're just trying to live your life the same way as everyone else,
Yeah.
and it involves persevering. Like it's not a thing you have to like mull over, right? Like you literally have to persevere or die, persevere or fail. So like for us, it's about overcoming the barriers, the
Yep.
obstacles that are real and placed in our way, um, for no reason. A lot of times, for no good reason, for sure. So it's I was lucky, like I had two parents who started me early, started teaching me at home early, started me reading early, got me curious about the world, taught me about the civil rights movement early before I
Mm.
even went to school. And despite all of that, brother, I still ended up believing racism was over for quite some time because that's what I was taught, despite being taught all that, despite being taught about all that, like,
Yeah.
so we're all, I try to be very patient with people. I try to meet people where they're at and understand that,
Mm.
like, we're all at different levels of education about racial hierarchy, how it's been used, how it's still being used, and what the future might possibly look like and how to achieve such a future that's less toxic in our racial environment. I am very hopeful that we can achieve that, brother, whether my
Mhm.
speech comes off today like that or not. But, like, the reason I'm hopeful is the same thing you said. Look how connected we are. Me and you were
Yeah.
connected, across country lines, brother. And,
Yeah.
like, and we just got to harness the power to connect and to unify and to act in concert for the right reasons. And
Absolutely
we
correct.
need to do it for more than just our own pleasure and entertainment. We need to get
Yeah.
serious. We need to start
Yeah.
using these tools in a more serious way to combat evil. Like, I mean, that's the simplest way that I can say
Yeah.
it, like, and I basically foresaw all the possibilities that were possible, so many different possibilities. And that's what got me acting on the Contraband Wagon, creating this platform, creating this space. And that's why I plan to take this show on the road, go to different localities, have the conversations in person with people, force them to look in the mirror, look at me, feel that rage at somebody
Mhm.
who's on a stage that you're watching give a speech about race that's making you feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Like, question yourself, and that's what we got to do. And it's not just racialized white people have to do the work, it's important to say that, I mean, internalized racism in the black community and anti blackness in the black community is
Uh,
extensive.
yeah, I could think of a few names now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, and it's a real problem. I deal with it a lot, because I'm like the white black person,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
Oreo, if you will, white on the inside, black on the outside.
I'm sure you could do a whole more 2 hours just on the colorism you've encountered in your life. It would be
100%,
pretty
brother.
yeah.
100%.
Kareem Carr, I'm sure you know. I don't always agree with what he says, um, sociopolitically, but mathematically, the guy's a genius, right? He argues his points in very logical, well thought out case. Always has citations. Oh, like he's basically exactly. I wish everyone would be on Twitter. And the amount of vitriol he got for that 2 + 2 = 5 thing, and I'm like, yeah, I know it's kind of like a Neil deGrasse Tyson level of, being a little too clever just to try. Like, I get what he's trying to do, but yeah, I just, the reaction he got, and people obviously, again, assuming, how did this person get hired, blah, blah, blah. Like I said, man, that success, it,
Yeah, I
it
mean, the
upsets a
dude
lot
goes
of
to
people. And
Harvard. Like, it's
yeah,
like
right.
it's like
Harvard.
oh, okay, like I guess he clearly didn't earn
Uh,
that. Like, it's just the casual nature with which people discard Black people's successes, you know, and achievements. All the PhDs in math that I've talked to, almost exclusively white men, we've always had great conversations.
Yep.
And I never felt disrespected, you know, during those conversations. But like, if you put me just like in a regular environment and I try and talk about math, people will say the most like racist and like just bigoted things about you and just call you stupid, say you have low IQ, all this stuff. And I'm like, that's why I stopped talking about math on Twitter. I was like, there's no point.
Yeah.
Like there's literally like I won't be listened to, I won't be respected, like, and you know, unfortunately it's kind of been like that in my career as well. The only reason why I wasn't able to be eliminated as a mathematics teacher is because I'm too good at it. Like my results are too
Speak
good.
for themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, they literally tried to get rid of me. They systematically have got rid of all the black teachers at my school almost, and I was on the chopping block, but they couldn't. They literally couldn't because they didn't have enough evidence. You know, they needed to show that I wasn't doing a good job and make up all the BS about I was
Yeah.
being unprofessional. You know, so they only have one of two.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it can be tough out there, brother, because you got to understand, like, glass ceiling is the right word. It literally, if you don't break the whole, you're not getting through that unless you shatter that thing. And like, it's very difficult to do that. You can't really do it from one side either. You need someone else on the other side, you know, like some kind of, I don't know, physics balance situation. But like, you know, you need someone fighting for you. And that's what that journalism professor didn't have. You know, she didn't have someone in her corner on the other side being like, no, we want her. Even though people profess after the fact, oh, this is a tragedy, we wanted her. Nobody was advocating for her at the time when she needed to figure out what to do, you know?
Right.
So a lot of us find
Someone.
ourselves in these situations and it's hard to figure out what to do, you know? And it's hard to maintain faith and it's hard to even figure out what direction you can go. I can't succeed the same way people who are racialized as white succeed. I cannot I know that now, you know, but I was taught not to ever believe that. I was taught to believe that we live in a world where if I do the same thing that people who are racialized as white do, that I will succeed like they succeed. It's simply not true. And because I was taught that, I wasted so many years trying to replicate what racialized white people were doing, thinking that I would have the same opportunities that they had. Meanwhile, running into that glass ceiling over and over and over and over and over again until I finally was forced to admit that maybe I need to do things a little bit differently. Maybe getting 3 degrees isn't enough. Maybe, you know, doing all these externships and you know and volunteering and you know helping people all the time and showing my skills and showing my success. Maybe that's it's just not enough. Maybe I need to find you know my own route, and that's what I'm trying to do these days. I'm trying to
Yep.
blaze my own path, one that hasn't existed before me, because to me that's the only way that I could actually give all of myself, which is all I want out of this world, you know, is to be able to give of myself and share the things that I've learned and pass it on, you know, same as anyone else. What gap? Not when.
Apples. Oh, sorry. Gaps in incarceration rates and average sentence lengths.
Incarceration rates. So you're
Yes.
saying,
If
okay, go on,
convicted,
go on.
how often, controlling for all other factors, if convicted of a crime, how often are they sent to jail? When sent to jail, how long are they sent for on average? So, yeah, obviously it doesn't surprise you that when convicted, Black people are likelier to be sentenced, and when sentenced, are likely to be sentenced for longer than a white person, right? Again, these are on averages. And I would certainly have no problem calling that a case of institutional racism, very clearly. But when you do the same analysis by sex, the gap skews heavily pro woman, far less likely to be incarcerated. Um, and yet, in that individual case, the institution of judicial penal systems, I would definitely say that that is a institutional sexism against men. Like they're the ones suffering it, and it's all the institutions together, the judges, the prosecutors, everything on down, that's giving men these grossly unequal grossly unequal outcomes. But if you try and say that, people are like, no, it's against men, so it's not institutional sexism. because they're using it like a proxy, because sexism by and large helps men more than it hurts them. They're like, well, in this particular case, it's still not institutional sexism against men, because you can't be sexist towards men because of the power dynamic. And that's why I've always thought the term institutional racism and institutional sexism winds up being just as a proxy for majority minority victim, or if you prefer the old school, reverse racism, reverse sexism terms. And I don't think those are particularly helpful because they're inaccurate. And that's why I've always thought, this one thing I hope we touch on next time, is that there should be a definition. I saw something called the vector, talked about vectors of discrimination. And my math mind is like, of course, like a vector variable. It has a direction and it has a magnitude. And I think that if we started thinking, or at least tried to think about racism in that way, rather than just there's institutional and then, not institutional as a proxy for majority minority, and we look at all these acts individually as having a direction and a magnitude, so that we don't wind up, um, what's the right word? We don't wind up equivocating falsely, between cases like that white woman, who I said probably could have been rightly the victim of a hate crime. We don't equivocate that case with the much larger cases and the much more frequent cases, but we can still examine each individually and say, yeah, they have the same direction, even if one is just a much larger magnitude than the other. I don't know if I told you, but the math I do now, I've been involved in the casino industry for a long time. Doing like the underlying calculations for designing new games, designing new slot machines. And from, what I've seen, in the casino industry, and like when I see how people talk about, gambling, as a whole. And, I don't know how I would explain it so it doesn't sound, just, it's not like, oh, here's a better way. If I was like involved in making alcohol, I was like, you're trying to find ways to make the alcohol more addictive, or to like to make it, and you would give it a cutesy name like increasing user engagement or something, right? A modern slot machine is like it's like a exercise in like modern psychology of like how it's applied, and all that. When I think about like all the metrics, that I'm involved with, and like
You're
things
reminding
when
me
you
of the
design.
advertising agency as well. Same,
Yeah,
same,
that's
same
another one,
deal.
right? You once you've looked behind the curtain and you see all the levers that get pulled to make things happen, it I know I'm lucky because I don't have a gambling problem, but I've had people I talk to and say, you speak in full throated defense of the industry, and they'll say, well, just I had a relative that took their life from depression from that, and when you go on about it, it makes it hard for me to not put up with you, but like to interact with you because you should know better, right? And so yeah, just think of what you're talking about going behind the curtain and knowing how the levers are pulled.
And don't you
Um,
think that it's
it's
impossible for anyone to know what you know, having not been where you've been?
it's in some cases, the gambling industry is a lot, it's a lot less opaque because the underlying mathematics of a game of a roulette wheel are like objectively knowable. Like high school and first year university stats will do like analysis
I've
where
done
you
it, brother.
come. Yeah,
I've
there
used.
you go.
I love gambling. I've been gambling since I was 19, so of course I brought it into all my classrooms, which a lot of
Oh yeah.
principals didn't like. But
But yeah, you know what I mean? Because of gambling the way it is, it's you can actually see the truth even if you don't want to do it. Even if we're talking about an industry dominated by a customer base whose favorite phrase is "Don't worry, God will bend the laws of probability just for me." You ever heard the gambler's prayer before?
I I am
The
familiar
gambler,
with it. Yes, sir.
yeah, yeah. Lord, I hope I break even today. I really need the money. Yeah,
Right.
it's yeah, but
Uh,
that's one difference. I think the legal system and the things you've seen much more opaque